if you guys are writing, and how many of you write for school papers at all? Okay. You could very easily, in a school paper, if you're writing about, let's say, a basketball team, let's say a game. Oh, you don't do that. We understand that. All sensitive people don't believe in athletics. Also, they're usually too thin to play. But if you're writing about anything, ranging all the way from a prom to whatever it might be that you're dealing with, if you want to deal with it in humor, make it much larger than life. So you build the prom up as the greatest event to happen since the invention of bottled beer. And when the prom finally arrives, you see, as you know in the story here, in Wanda Hickey, the prom finally arrives. It comes as a fantastic event. And then it starts to slowly go downhill. But remember, the people in the prom don't realize it. They still think they're having a great time when the rain is coming down. They get a flat on the Long Island Expressway. A fight breaks out in the parking lot. They still know it's a great moment in their life, the prom. So when writing humor and dealing in humor is a difficult form because most people don't know when to stop. This is the problem with most humorists. They get an idea and they pound it into the ground until finally, at the end of 1,000 words, you've heard enough of it. So you must constantly vary what you do all the time. You have to keep and always save your biggest point of your story. By the way, I wonder how many of you notice in the stories, particularly stories, I'm using my own work here because it's what we're here for, is implied throughout the story. When you begin to read the story right from the beginning, there's always implied something is going to happen near the end. That is almost, it's implied. You drop hints here and there. Don't ever open up a story and say, and this is the mark of a bad storyteller, is to tell you in the beginning of a story what the story is about. And you'll come on and say, hey, you even see this among friends of yours that hit you on the back and say, hey man, did I hear a funny joke? It damn well better be at that point. He's already told you what your reaction should be to it. And if he does this, the minute he tells you that, he's already setting up his own defeat. Now, if on the other hand, he says, hey, did you hear this thing about what happened in this bar on 3rd Avenue with this bow-legged dachshund? 5 minutes later, you got him eating out of your hand, but never tell him it's supposed to be funny or it's supposed to be evil or scary. Don't ever open up and say, I'm going to tell you a scary story. Well, what scares you may not scare him. And let the story do it itself, always. Always let the story unfold in its own way. And timing in the story is very important. The beat, the tempo of the story. How many of you read in let's see, it was last fall, in Playboy, the Mole People, Battle of Forces of Darkness? Well, there's enough here that I can talk a little bit about it. But this was a story where from the beginning it was about a boys' camp. And it was from the beginning, if you remember the story, right from the opening bus ride, it was implied all through the story that the I, and incidentally, the I in my stories is not me, Gene Shepard. This is a literary I. It's there's nowhere in any of my stories do I use the name Gene Shepard. No place in any story. It's an I in the same way that let's say the I is an I in Catcher in the Rye. Now, to clear up a lot of confusion, you see, you often have to clear up the confusion in the reader's mind. You have to tell him that. Well, I assume that he doesn't have to be told that in 1972. For example, if you've ever read Moby Dick, right at the opening sentence, the very opening sentence, the writer says, "Call me Ishmael." And from that moment on, it's in the first person. It says, "I went to this town to become a sailor." Now, had he not had that opening line, "Call me Ishmael," every reader would believe that it's Herman Melville, reminiscent. It's E.I. in the opening of Catcher in the Rye. Holden Caulfield says, "Well, I suppose you want to know all that jazz about my name and all that stuff." Well, I suppose you want to know that. So my name is Holden Caulfield. And then he starts to say, go through the word, and that's just the first opening sentence. And he uses the term I after that. Now, if on all my stories I had opened up by saying, "Call me Clarence." Now, wait a minute. You know the problem you kids have got. You hear me on the radio, and you assume too much. Hearing me on the radio, you assume that this is Gene Shepard in all these stories. I'm sure you do. And actually, that's very local. You just happen to hear me here in this area. But a reader, say, reading me in Paris, or a reader reading me in Greece, or any other place in the world, or say even in a place like Albuquerque, he's never heard me on the air. All he knows is that there's a story here, and there is an I who did this. So he doesn't think in terms of Gene Shepard. That's why I had to do that, really, because it has to tell the reader that this is not me talking. And say, "In God we trust." You know that? Any of you read "In God we trust," all of this big cash. Okay. The character in this book is a man named Ralph Parker, who lives in a very different way than I live, personally. If you remember, he lives in this elegant apartment in somewhere in New York City. And he's really an elegant person. He knows all the head waiters. He spends all his time in these French restaurants, you see. That was done deliberately so that the contrast between the life of the guy who has made it in New York is directly contrasted with the life of the people that he's left and that he has lived with in Indiana, or whatever state it is. It's Indiana in the book. So that was the point of the story. That was really the point of the whole novel, really. A whole series of shared memories that these two lived with. Now that's what, maybe that answers the question that a lot of you have, why I use the word Ralph Parker in that book. Kids will always come and say, "How come you changed your name?" which is not at all true, because that isn't me in that book at all, in any way, shape, or form. Now, I've given, this is just a little introduction here on how to write a short story, or at least to start out with 4 or 5 characters. I'll give you just a brief thumbnail thing on how you can start to write. You start out with 4 or 5 characters. Think of characters. And then, from that moment on, if you really think the characters out, what kind of people they are, you've already got the very important beginnings of a novel or a short story. Most people go the other way. They think of a story. I mean, the amateur does. The amateur thinks of a story and then proceeds to create characters around that. This is exactly doing it the opposite of any good writer. Any good writer begins with characters. Melville, for example, began with Captain Ahab. He did not begin with a story. He began with Ahab. By the way, are you curious about that novel? I am. Always fascinates me because it's generally considered one of the greatest novels in the English language. Do you know that the incident upon which Moby Dick was based took place right off of Patchogue? Actually happened on Long Island. not in New Bedford. How many of you knew that? That the incident of a ship being attacked by a whale and destroyed by a whale actually happened off Patchogue. And Melville was working here in New York City at the time, in the customs house, I believe it was, and he heard of this incident of a whale attacking a ship. And he had been a whaler, and he also knew whalers very much like Ahab. And so he created the two. He put the two together, and he came up with the Moby Dick. But both of them were based on reality. In other words, the story and the characters. The incident actually did happen. Now, how many of you remember the short story well, actually it was an episode in God We Trust, the one about the 4th of July, the giant 4th of July. All right, now there's a classic example. Every last one of you have been around where somebody's firing off fireworks, right? You all know that, and there's always a secret fear inside of all of you, whenever you're around fireworks, that the stuff is going to go off. All right, the story is really based on that universal fear. Now, when you take that and add that to another character, another effort, let's say another level, that if you can imagine a drunk firing off a gigantic piece of fireworks equipment, you got a fantastic situation, right from the start. Now that's how a short story has begun. You all have known a drunk in your life, whether you want to admit it or not. and you've also all known fireworks in your life. So you take the two known situations, fireworks and drunks, and you're already on your way towards a story. Now, my stories are different in one respect from most other writers, and this is probably one of the reasons why critics are a little confused about my work. That I deal with what could be called American ritual. This is not today, currently, a popular form of writing. In other words, most writers must deal with recognized, during any period of time, there is a convention. And so today, a convention, as if you want to be right in the mainstream of convention, you would write a novel about race. This is convention. Today, that would be an official novel to the Times. If you write about war, that's a convention. Now, you always have to say the right things about war, too, remember. You have to always say war is evil. This is a convention. To me, the first two or three lines of a war novel always bore me because I know what the writer's going to tell me. He's going to tell me that war is evil. That's like a whole novel that